The stuff you got today or recently, was it in the letter from the Taylor Shellfish people, or not any of those other letters?
No,
or?
no.
Okay.
So
Yeah, but the concept of fish pens is well known. It has been, I mean, over the course of the stack, the pros and cons of the science for and against net pens, I think it's fairly well known.
And it may have been referred to in there, but it wasn't directly referred to us.
Yeah, so then it becomes a policy question, and you've deliberated, you've got a recommendation. And if you have more questions, bring it back up, yes.
Yeah.
And you can make it a type 3, and that way it would always go to a public hearing. That way it would always be that vetting process, and there would always be a quasi-judicial process to decide whether or not someone was entitled to install net pens.
Yeah, the part I didn't like in the Planning Commission recommendation was kind of like, let's make it a conditional use, but so restrictive they'll never be able to do it. Okay, well, why don't we just prohibit it then?
Right.
Because if they're never going to be able to do it, let's not run them through thousands of dollars of cost to a hearing examiner that's going to deny because staff sees the criteria and goes, looks like it's, you can't meet it.
Right.
And it's a de facto denial, but you can have your day in court. Okay, well, that's good public process, but it's maybe...
Well, the conditions should be written that way, you're right. I mean, the conditions should be, make it possible.
Yeah. I mean, we have a prohibition right now on net pens, ongoing in our current SMP.
Well, and this issue actually comes up with the other issue of other finfish aquaculture that we had a prohibition on in the draft document. And we did a lot of discussion up here about whether to keep that door open enough for low impact finfish aquaculture, a little trout pond or a little something like that.
I would consider a trout pond to be finfish aquaculture.
Yeah, so in talking about that, actually the same expert was asking me to get rid of prohibitions, and none of that matters. You're not going to find any place you can do that on the shoreline of Jefferson County. The conditions aren't going to be right, so all that discussion. He says you can have that in there, but nobody's going to be able to do it. So it almost leads to the argument of why not have the prohibition and save everybody the grief. You're not going to allow it because the conditions are so strict.
Is that the only experts? There's an expert saying that it's not going to be feasible anywhere in Jefferson County to use net pens?
Yeah,
that's right.
Is there any experts saying the opposite?
Upland.
To do
Upland tank.
upland. Upland tanks, and I don't know if that's true or not. That's the last, that's an off-the-record comment in a phone call after the record's closed.
So you have this situation where the public comment period's over,
right,
and the issues are still festering, which is common.
Yeah.
But you have to be very cautious about your indication to the public that is the comment period over or not, and what are you deliberating on? So what is your record? Your record includes what's been submitted, not additional documents that are coming in after the close of the comment period.
Right. Well, and that happens every Monday morning as I read this thing saying these public comments are part of a hearing record, but that doesn't mean we aren't listening, and it doesn't mean we don't hear what people have to say, and it doesn't have to.
Yeah, any issue you find that you're concerned about prior to your legislative decision, you can bring it back up and reconsider, ask questions, take another vote if you want.
I would just add that within the review of this issue, the pendulum has swung from prohibition to allowing with limitations. So anywhere within that range would be within your discretion.
Yeah. And well,
I remember 18 scientists wrote a letter to the government salmon scientists wrote a letter to the government of British Columbia saying it's an immutable fact that the species reared in crowded conditions like this will get bacterial disease. It's just in any species. I don't see how you could, why anybody would invest a substantial amount of money in fish farms when they knew that they couldn't ever use antibiotics, and there's a very good chance they'll need antibiotics. I'm comfortable with the outright prohibition. As you said, they can come up with something in 2 years.
Right.
Come for revision.
And kind of for that reason, I'm inclined to agree with you on this one. And I know I've kind of gone back and forth on this myself. But to go with the prohibition, which would be the, let's see, 8.4a, the last comment there, and then also when it gets into uses and activities, to reinstitute the prohibition language for both net pens and finfish aquaculture.
Well, before we close
We're not going to
on this, I think what this demonstrates something of interest, which is, and it's one reason I didn't speak up more strongly against having an outright prohibition, is I don't know what you guys are going to say when we get together, you know, because we don't discuss, you know, how we feel and the intensity of our opinions about different issues. And as I looked at the prohibition, the outright prohibition, I thought that it would be reasonable for us to have a conditional use, a fairly strict conditional use applied to net pens. And I was a little surprised at the intensity of feeling about not allowing net pens under any conditions. And I reread the material, and I realized that there's a group of people who are totally opposed to net pens because of the density of fish population. But I also read material that's available to all of us. It was submitted in time that noted that where the net pens are located, what the water flow is like, you know, how it's managed, you know, all these things mitigate and then, you know, filter. To support your point, people aren't going to build net pens if they know that they're going to have a bunch of dead fish. And the world's population of wild salmon, wild fish is severely stressed right now, as we all know. You know, you probably know it better than any of us do. Hence, I think, like it or not, we're going to see increased aquaculture, and that it makes sense for us to have the door open, not to just slam it completely. You know, that's why I would, you know, I'd certainly respect, you know, you're not agreeing, but that's why I would argue in favor of having, allowing net pens under certain conditions.
Are you saying the same conditions that were listed by the planning commission?
No, not quite.
Because to me, that's a prohibition.
Right. And you know, and maybe it was written that way as a prohibition, in a way of sort of saying two things at once, or getting around the absolute prohibition while actually making one kind of a Herculean task. And that's why, you know, I would suggest that we would leave it up to the DCD or a hearing examiner to make that decision. If they don't follow state and federal regulations and they're going to degrade the water quality, then they can't do it.
Well, I have a little trouble with that because in Canada for years they followed the regulations of the Canadian government and it escapes. They had pollution, they had a lot of problems. I think the door is partway open, you know, partially open because somebody can come in and go for revision at any point, at any year.